Welcome to another Walking by Faith Missions Church Bible study. Today we're going to be talking about the Red Sea crossing. Okay, and to be honest with you, what this is going to reveal is there is no outsmarting God. First of all, I'd like to take a look at the choices that Moses made. Moses' adoption as the son of Pharaoh's daughter qualified him to the throne of Egypt in his 40th year. Yet through his free will, it aroused his sympathies for his people, the enslaved race of the Hebrews, and he began to plan their promised deliverance. One day he avenged the mistreatment of one of his brethren by killing an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew. And Moses was then forced to flee Egypt, and he went into exile in a place called Midian. So then, where is this Midian that is once ruler of Egypt flew? Where did he go to? Where did he flee to? Well, Midian was the territory of a group of people called the Midianites, and it's located just on the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba in Arabia. The Midianites, or the Arabians, if you will, were descendants of Abraham through someone by the name of Keturah. And if you want to look that up, you can go to Genesis 25:2. By fleeing Midian, Moses was out of harm's way as the Egyptians were in control of the Sinai Peninsula. You see, they had forts, temples, and inscriptions all over the place, which tell of the mining operations that the Egyptians did in the area. So Moses then, after being in Midian, spent 40 years there. And 40 years later, God appeared to Moses in a burning bush and told him that he was going to bring Israel out of Egypt to the very mountain where he himself, right then and there, was tending his sheep. And you can read that in Exodus, the 3rd chapter, verses 2 and 12, at which 12 reads, "When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain." Now, notice, if you will, that Moses was told to lead his people back to a mountain in Midian, to the mountain where God first spoke to him. And this particular mountain is called Horeb. That's Horeb. And this is according to Exodus 3:1, 33:6. It's also mentioned in the first book of Kings, 19:8. So the particular mountain is called Horeb and also Sinai. So there's a couple of names for this mountain where God told Moses to bring the people back to. Now, this mountain is not, therefore, located in the so-called Sinai Peninsula. It's not located there, but it's located in Arabia. And if you want a little further explanation of what the Bible's Arabia is go to Galatians, the 4th chapter, the 25th verse. That's the 4th chapter, the 25th verse. Now, Sinai, as it turns out, really is the most misplaced mountain in history. The traditional Mount Sinai, which has a Catholic St. Catherine's Monastery, is nothing more than a phony tourist attraction, to be honest with you. Okay? The Sinai Peninsula is also misnamed even today. The true Mount Sinai is the 8,000-foot mountain called Jebel, J-E-B-E-L. That's Jebel al-Lawz, L-A-W-Z. Jebel al-Lawz, which means the mountain, in Hebrew, the mountain of law. And it's located near the eastern shore of Aqaba, which is in Midian, which is in Saudi Arabia. Okay? Now, it was safe for Moses. It was an area that Moses could go to, and there is no evidence whatsoever of any kind of Egyptian occupation there. So since the biblical Mount Sinai lies in Saudi Arabia, then crossing through the sea had to be across the Gulf of Aqaba's arm of the Red Sea. So it means he's got to cross the Red Sea wherever it is that the arm of the Gulf of Aqaba is. Now, that is not the Gulf of Suez today. That's commonly thought. All right. So where was the city of Ramesses from which Israel left? Okay. Because the Bible says, now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, not including women and children. Now, there was a city with this name, and Exodus 1:11 states that it's so. Ramesses was also the name of the Delta region, which is the land given to Joseph's family to live in when they came to Egypt during the plagues. A portion of this region, the eastern Delta, was called Goshen. Okay, that's where the Israelites resided. And when it was time for Exodus, the slaves left their homes in Ramesses, or Goshen, if you will, and proceeded to leave Egypt proper. So where was Sukkoth actually at? Well, for this, you have to see Exodus 12:37, 13:20, and Numbers 33, 5, and 6. Sukkoth was this assembly area for this tremendously large group of people and their livestock. Now, this we're talking about. This is after God sent the plagues on Egypt, and Pharaoh told them, "Get out." Okay. Egyptian documents mention a border station known as Jiku or Tharu, located along the ancient Suez Canal, which connected the Gulf of Suez and the marsh lakes with the Mediterranean Sea. This canal is known to have existed based on previous satellite photos. It's not there today, but when this research was going on, satellite photos confirmed it. At the border, the point where one would leave Egypt proper and then go into the Sinai Desert, there was a fort there. And in this area, a line of fortifications were there by the Egyptians to keep the Bedouins or the Arabs out of Egypt. The great fortress Tharu was in this area, and it's often mentioned as the assembly point of the great military Egyptian expeditions that they did into the northern countries of conquering. So it was here that Moses organized this great mass of people and their possessions, which basically amounted to carts and animals. It was here that he assembled them up for the march out of Egypt. Now, I got to tell you, looking at this as a whole, this was no simple task. And Moses used his organizational skills to organize the hundreds of thousands that as he had done by, learning with the Egyptian military expeditions. As a matter of fact, Acts the 7th chapter 22 verse tells us, and Moses was educated in all learning of the Egyptians, and he was a man of power in words and deeds. So see, Moses was not a stupid person. It wasn't just a regular person who, got tossed in the bushes and was retrieved by Pharaoh's daughter, and could just become stupid. He was very educated. Now, the result is stated in Exodus 13:18 of what Moses was doing, and it's called, "Thus God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea, and the sons of Israel went up in martial, or a better word would be militaristic array from the land of Egypt. The term went up in like a military or martial array is gotten from the original Hebrew scriptures. It's from the verb mux, M-U-X, translated as shamush. And shamush means to arrange in multiples of 5 and refers to a well-organized march, and not like many would describe and think of it as a bunch of mobs, just fleeing a particular area. In other words, what God's saying here is that there's order in everything that he does. And that's why there's no outsmarting him nor beating him. So you can see that Moses was doing this according to what he had learned, and it's exactly what God allowed to happen. So where is the next location that they go now that, Moses has got them all gathered up and, they're leaving? Well, Exodus 13:20 tells us, then they set out from Sukkoth and camped in Etham on the edge of the wilderness. Now, God prohibited Israel from taking the direct route to Canaan, which was actually a coastal northern route called the way of the land of the Philistines. In other words, God didn't send them up through the area where the Philistines were. He brought them down out of Egypt, through the marshes and stuff like that. Now, I'm sure God has his reasons for that, because no doubt he could have handled the Philistines, when he was moving his people. But we just have to keep in mind that's exactly how God chose to do it. Okay, they were told to take the southern route to Canaan, called the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea. Now, actually, God doesn't bother to tell us why this is happening. Now, actually, it was a longer route, but it was well traveled by many caravans and also a lot of militaries. Roads were running in that area due east through the northern Sinai Peninsula. Etham was a region in the mid to the northern edge of the Gulf of Aqaba. So why am I telling you all of this about the Exodus? Well, we know this, these certain things, facts that we need to know so that you can understand the mind of God in planning all of this. In other words, he could have went here to the land of the Philistines, but he didn't. He could have done this, but he didn't. This is to show us, okay, the power that God actually possesses and the things that he does for his people and how he brilliantly engineers it. And this is why we're going over this right now. Okay, all right. Now, before they were in Etham, they crossed the Red Sea, and were in it after they crossed the Red Sea. So just keep in mind this place called Etham. And now we come to what's called a detour. Okay, this is after they left, Egypt properly from their assembly area. Now, Israel did not continue on the highway to Canaan, but were told by God, turn back and camp before Pihahiroth, between Midal and the sea. Now, this can be found in Exodus 14:1-2. So see, God's telling them where he wants them to camp. So, and then if anyone would be reading this, you'd ask, okay, why? Why would he want them to camp in this one particular place? And the answer is that this maneuver, by taking this detour, okay, is a ploy to lure Pharaoh into God's trap. Exodus 14:3. I suggest you read it. It's just one example of the supremacy of God. And this produced the following when they took this detour. You see, Pharaoh then figured that the Hebrews were wandering aimlessly and were disoriented in the wilderness. And considering the path that they were committed to, it actually shut them in with their backs against the sea. All right. It was actually, as far as Pharaoh was concerned, guess what? They cornering themselves up in this canyon here, and we just going to slaughter them. But again, all right, that would be the way that a man thinks. But here again, remember, we're dealing with the greatness of God. Because you see, the verb in that suggests that the surrounding terrain hemmed in the Jews, and that is exactly the case as the new proposed crossing site. Okay, and this was chosen by God, and God's going to demonstrate this. What we have studied thus far and what we will see demands a crossing site somewhere along the shore of the Gulf of Aqaba. Okay, now there is a breach of a tremendous size on the eastern Gulf of Aqaba at a place called Nuweiba, which is noted on modern maps. And the only passage to it is through an 18-mile-long wadi, which is actually a dried-up riverbed system. So in order to go the way that they got to go, with the way God's leading them to this beach where God's going to show them further miracles, they have to go through this canyon in this wadi, and it kind of hems them up a little bit. Okay? In other words, you can only imagine the amount of people that Moses had. And when they get to this canyon, of course, they're all funneled down. Now, the only path out of the wadi, or this particular canyon area where they were, empties onto an enormous beach. All right? So in other words, they're in the right place, if you want to use man's sense of things, because they can see that through the canyon is a huge beach, and they're going to need a huge beach, to stage everybody, waiting to see whether God's going to pick them up and fly them across the Red Sea. I mean, they really just don't know. But they know, Moses does know, that they got to cross the Red Sea. Now, on the north end of the beach are the remains of an Egyptian fortress, which is no doubt something called Pi Ha-Hiroth, meaning house of the goddess Hathor. So see, the Egyptians were familiar with the place too, because they had some kind of shrine or temple out there. Okay. On the opposite shore, 8 miles in Saudi Arabia, on the opposite shore, now across the lake, precisely across from where they camp by the sea, is another ancient structure, which may be, is believed, a Midianite fortress dedicated to a false god Baal, called Baal-Zephon. And that can be verified also again by Exodus 14:2. So you see, God brings the Israelites to these areas, and they got a temple of an Egyptian god on one side, and a temple of Baal, false god, on the other side. And God's just going to take this and just show his power in the face of these two temples. All right. Now, we got to ask the question then, okay, Nick, now we got everything staged. What is the Red Sea? And it's also called Yam Sup, Yamsuph. The Red Sea is quite large, and it's extending from Ethiopia and Yemen in the south, and it separates actually North Africa from the Arabian Peninsula over there. Okay, at its northern end, meaning at the top of where it comes to a head, it splits into two arms. One of them is the Gulf of Suez, and the other one is the Gulf of Aqaba. Now remember, okay, we mentioned Aqaba earlier, a verse that really, truly, unmistakably demonstrates that the Gulf of Aqaba branch is also part of the Red Sea, is wrong. And how do we know this? Because in 1 Kings 9:26, this is what it says. King Solomon also built a fleet of ships in Ezon-Geber, which is near Eloth on the north shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. Now, scripture indicates that the water that they crossed was deep. Okay. And God says this to us through Isaiah. Isaiah 43, 16 and 17. A path through the mighty waters, and also chapter 51:10. Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the depths of the sea a pathway for the redeemed to cross over? Okay. Further in Isaiah 63, 11 through 13, who led them through the depths? All right. From Psalms, your way was in the sea, and your paths in the mighty waters, and your footprints may not be known. You did lead your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. And from Exodus 15:10, we read, you did blow with your wind, the sea covered them, they sank like lead in the mighty waters. What do you think that applies to? So we can plainly see that God holds nothing back in granting knowledge to us, not only about his character, meaning that anything that he does is always for our good, even though we don't understand it many times, and his sharing of the things to protect, bless, and cherish all that he loves. All right. So see, no matter what situation God may allow you to get yourself into, you have to remember, all right, that he loves and cherishes all the things that belong to him, and we belong to him. Now, the crossing place wasn't some shallow sea, of like where weeds were growing, maybe a foot deep or something like that. No, no, okay, it was not. All right, and a lot of conservatives in religion, all right, and also there's a lot of liars in religions who say that they crossed over through some reeds, of about a foot and a half deep or something like that. Right. So now let's see where it is the Israelites are, and then keep in mind the greatness of God as we listen, because keep this in mind now. Our charts today show that the Gulf of Aqaba, it's a trench, and it's a canyon, and it's 5,000 feet deep. All right, and this is where they're going to cross. The western shoreline drops steeply underwater into this canyon at a slope of 45 degrees, which means it's too steep for people to cross over. However, at the precise location of the Nuwibia beach, sound familiar? That was the beach on the other side of the canyons where the Israelites are locked up. Okay. The deep trench is spanned by an underwater land bridge. I'm going to say that to you again. The precise location of the Nuwibia beach, the deep trench of 5,000 feet, is spanned by an underwater land bridge. Divers have confirmed this fact. The pathway through the sea has been estimated at 900 meters, which is about 2,700 feet wide. This land bridge, 2,700 feet wide. Do you know how many football fields that is? That's 8 football fields. And then with a little change left over. That's how wide this underwater land bridge is, okay? 8 football fields. And from the Egyptian shore, it slopes down at a gentle angle of 6 degrees underwater, which is a gradual slope until midway across the sea at its deepest point, some 300 meters below. In other words, if it's 5,000 feet deep, it slopes down to about 300 meters or 1,000 feet below where the water would normally cover it. Okay, and then we can see that the pathway then was a gentle slope down, then a straightaway, and then a gradual rise to the other shore. Think God didn't know what he was doing? Keep in mind that the Red Sea, has a depth of 1,000 feet. So midway across on each side, the walls of water that were standing up straight were up to 1,000 feet tall. Now I got to tell you, that's a 10-story building. And now I guess the great question to ask is how hard was it to cross at this particular site where God led Moses and the people? Well, first, however, keep in mind the physical requirements of the crossing site. I mean, they weren't all youngsters. The ages were babies to possibly maybe in their 70s, 80s, 90s, who knows? Anybody's guess for sure could be correct. Now, let's keep going along here. What was needed for all these people to be gathered together and await their turn to cross? Well, God provided this. A suitably large staging area is met by a beach through the cliffs. This is this Nuweiba beach we were talking about, okay? On the other side of the canyon where the Israelites were munched on down. And keep in mind, all of this while, Pharaoh's being barred by fire where he can't get through, okay? So now the Israelites begin funneling through this canyon out onto the beach area. And believe you me, there's no doubt that God made sure the beach was exactly what he needed, okay? The way to the site was through the Wadi Wadir. In other words, as they were coming out from underneath Saudi Arabia and all, okay? When they were coming out from Egypt through the marshlands and all, and then wound up into the desert area, okay? This is where they wound up being led to, okay? Now, and actually they were led into this box canyon, you can call it, right there where the beach was. There was mountains actually on all sides of them. The undersea land bridge is both wide enough and gentle enough in slope to accommodate as many people as you could fit upon it. And now for the skeptics, and yeah, if I didn't know this, I'd have plenty of questions too. Wasn't the site too far from Egypt? The answer is the distance from the Suez Canal to Nuweiba is about 210 miles. In other words, from when they left wherever they were in Egypt, all right, that God brought them 210 miles, all right, to this Nuweiba beach. Now that's not really, I guess, considered unusual or unreasonable. And Yahweh was going before them in a pillar of a cloud by day, and of course by night, when they camped. So the Hebrews were in excellent physical condition considering their life in Egypt. I mean, they kept them busy. They just weren't laying around. So it's not like they were all lethargic. All right. Israel had a significant head start on Pharaoh's army. And so why this detour? Why? I mean, come on, we don't need God to tell us, do we? Number one, here's we're going to get into God's mind to draw Pharaoh into a trap. Number two, for God to bring glory to himself. And number three, to bring Israel to the mountains where Moses was called to go get them. All right? That's God's purpose in all of this. How long did it really take them to cross? Considering the amount of people. So I'm going to crunch some numbers for you so you can have some kind of idea in case you get into a discussion with somebody else, or maybe just for your own knowledge, okay? Now remember, we're checking the Creator God's math here, all right? We crunched the numbers, a width of the underwater bridge at 2,500 feet would allow, actually, if you put people across it, it'll allow 5 feet between people. All right. And that's side to side. So that would give space for about 500 people across, all in one line. Okay. That's how wide it was. where 500 people could actually not stand shoulder to shoulder, but just a little ways away from one another and be still on this land bridge. Okay. The length of the crossing, shore to shore, was 8 miles. That's how far they had to go across. All right. So let's say if you can travel and you can walk 2.5 miles per hour, it would take like 3 hours for the front row to go across. All right. Now, allowing for half of these people to be driving, animals and ducks and chickens and all, and a quarter of the people to be, let's say they had a cart, possessions. Probably if you gather up and divide up all the people, 500 wide across the way, it would require about a column of 9.5 miles. Okay. Or actually, to get them all across, it would actually only take 4 hours of walking time once the front row got across. The back would come across 4 hours later. And the final row would leave the western shore some 4 hours after the departure of the front row. So this is how long God's holding off Pharaoh, all right? And would take 3 to 4 hours to actually make the crossing. Well, I'm sure that once God had the end of the people further enough out from harm, where he knew no matter what Pharaoh did, he could never catch them, this is exactly when God turns Pharaoh loose, takes away the fire that's barring their way and whatever else he may have been using. Now, I'm not God, and this I know for sure. If it took 2 years, God would have taken care of the issue. And no matter how long it actually took them to cross. Now, here's more for you from some research. This is details related to the Egyptian pursuit, okay? Pertinent scripture I'm going to use is Exodus 14, 6 through 9, and 23. 6 through 9 reads, "And he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and the captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with a high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen, and his army. And he overtook the Israelites, okay, while they were encamped by the sea, besides Pihahiroth. That's the name of it. Okay, and if you want to look it up in ancient maps, it's an area before Baal-zephon. Now, Pharaoh made his chariot ready. And it's believed from a lot of the research and all of the things that's been found in the Valley of Kings and, brought forth as history and what have you, it's believed that the Pharaoh who actually pursued them was named Concharis. That's Koncharis. Koncharis. And the reason that this conclusion is drawn is that with everything that was found in the Valley of the Kings that related to that particular time, during which time the Israelites were captive in Egypt, there was no grave ever found, no tributes to him whatsoever. Okay, so that's why speculation leans to him as being the one that God overwhelmed. He took his people with him is probably a reference to members of the priesthood. Remember, we said they had a temple out there. Okay. And he took 600 select chariots, which is really not enough to be a division, but they were probably ceremonial chariots that his people, the priests, rode in. He took all the other chariots of Egypt, which is a reference to all of the war chariots, with officers over all of them, is a reference to his division commanders. So this tells us about a size of that he had. He took his cavalry, which is his horsemen, and he took his infantry, which is his army. They were all involved. And estimates from the time range from 20,000 of chariots and up to 250,000 men. All right. That's how many it's estimated he took with him into the desert to slaughter the Israelites. The priesthood and the military are linked. The divisions of the army were named after the principal gods of Egypt. Elaborate ceremonies were conducted whenever the Egyptian army departed for war, asking the gods for victory. Military victories that took place were directly attributed to the favors from the gods. Booty from the war was then dedicated to the priesthood and the temples of their various gods. Priests would accompany the army to the battlefield. And if the Egyptian army ever needed supernatural intervention by the hands of their gods, surely it was on this occasion. And guess what? The Egyptian gods, they were nowhere to be found. Why? They didn't exist. Pharaoh's watery defeat was yet a final slap at the gods of Egypt. And if you want to know this, God threw in for good measure the fact that Pharaoh's pursuit was held up long enough for the Hebrews to cross the 8 miles shore to shore. They were held up. The cloud theophany put darkness in the advance of the Egyptian forces in the Wadi Wadia Canyon. Okay, now the cloud supplied light at night for Israel so they could see where God was parting the Red Sea by a strong east wind, and this wind blew all night. Okay, the moment of truth came for the Egyptians when God supernaturally removed the wheels of the chariots, producing mass confusion and panic among the Egyptians. Did you know that? Exodus 14, 24 and 25. God supernaturally removed the wheels of the chariots. Okay? And it came to pass that in the morning watch, the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of Egyptians. All right. He took off their chariot wheels that they drove them heavily. So in other words, when they took off, they didn't have the wheels. Pharaoh said, get going. They made the horses pull the chariot without the wheels. So that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. So the priests, they hightailed it, boom, back to Egypt. Okay? And if God took the wheels off their chariots. So they went back to Egypt with the horse pulling them and the chariot dragging. That was the priests. Okay? So now I'll close with this question. What's down there in the Red Sea? Do you know? Well, physical evidence on the floor of the Red Sea has been reported finally in time. By who? A man named Ron Wyatt, that's W-Y-A-T-T, and his sons. They have been diving along different parts of the Red Sea. Now, many people have looked years and years and years, but to no avail of ever coming up with anything. But he began the search off the Nuwibia Beach based on clues that he found in the book of Exodus, meaning that God wasn't hiding anything, just nobody really bothered to find it until this man did his search. And in the first half hour, that he was diving, he found a chariot wheel in 80 feet of water. They also found chariot wheels strewn across the seabed. They additionally found chariot remains, which were covered with coral. They found chariot cabs, meaning a part that stood upright and came around. Some of the wheels on their axles and some were off. They found several 6-spoked wheels as well as 8-spoked wheels. And finally, Ron found a gold chariot wheel, okay, which is not covered in coral, but it was in fragile condition due to the fact that the wood had actually rotted underneath the gold. It decomposed, but the form was still there. So, as of my last reported knowledge, it's still there. He did not bring it up, but took pictures of it. It's waiting to be carefully removed. It's located near the rear of Pharaoh's army, and its ornamental nature suggests it may have been a priestly chariot or maybe one of the 600 choice chariots bearing Pharaoh's best fighters. This man Ron Wyatt, also reported finding skeletal remains, he found hip bones, skulls, and even a horse's hoof. And I close with, and now you know, you cannot outsmart God, ever. Thanks for being here. I hope this provided a little insight for you into the greatness of God, along with the story of telling what he does for his people, Israel. And, okay, that's what I hope you take from this. Take care. Join us again for another Bible study, if you will, and join us this coming Sunday for our Sunday service. See you then. Bye.